Welcome to the France 24 debate. I'm Mark Owen. Donald Trump makes history, the only US president to be impeached, not once, but twice. The vote in the House of Representatives saw 10 Republicans flip over to vote against their president. Such is the depth of feeling over the violence at the Capitol last week. This is Nancy Pelosi, the House Majority Leader there, showing the articles have just been signed. Last week, of course, a mob of pro-Trump supporters basically egged on by the president during his speech, marched on Congress, occupying, vandalising the premises. And as a consequence of that violence, 5 people lost their lives. In the France 24 debate, we're asking, is this the end of the story or just another beginning? Is this a solution that might close the divisions on US society, or might it make matters worse? Our panel to discuss the second impeachment of US President Donald J. Trump. Amy Beeler from Democrats Abroad. Amy, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
On the other side of the studio, they're not necessarily opposed. Nita Wiggins, former news journalist and lecturer at ESJ here in Paris. Great to see you. We have 2 guests joining us from afar. Alex Meyer is a specialist in US politics and professor at the University of Bourgogne. Joining us by Skype from Dijon. Alex, you're very welcome to be with us. Thank you for joining us. And Todd Belt is professor and director of the Political Management Program at the George Washington University, joining us, as you can see, by Skype from Washington, D.C. Welcome to you all. Before I let you loose, I've got a couple more things to say. The House of Representatives then deciding that the rhetoric of President Trump incited the crowd to commit an insurrection, an unprecedented political scenario in US history. The words of House Leader Nancy Pelosi speaking volumes for the feeling in the chamber.
Today, in a bipartisan way, the House demonstrated that no one is above the law, not even the President of the United States. That Donald Trump is a clear and present danger to our country, and that once again, we honored our oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help us God.
Nancy Pelosi there. So now the House has impeached Trump. There will be a trial in the Senate. He's been there before, of course. Last year he was acquitted on abuse of power and on misleading Congress. This one is on incitement of insurrection. Trump, though, is set to leave office in less than a week, so it's far from clear how the rest of the impeachment will play out. Here at France 24, Claire Rush with a look at what might happen.
House Democrats can choose when to send their article of impeachment to the Senate. House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer says he's hopeful that it will be sent soon. Once received, the Senate must begin a trial without delay. However, the Republican-controlled Senate is currently in recess until January 19th, the day before Joe Biden's inauguration. And Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he won't reconvene the chamber before then, meaning the Senate trial won't begin until after Donald Trump leaves office. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court will preside over the trial, and 9 impeachment managers appointed by the House will prosecute the case. Trump has yet to announce his defense team. Once the trial is over, a 2/3 majority of senators is needed to convict Trump. By then, it will be too late to remove him from office, but there are other punishments that could be voted on.
It seems counterintuitive that you could impeach and remove someone if they're not in office anymore, and removal seems to be the main point of impeachment. But even after he's left office, there is the possibility, if they convict him, of the disqualification remedy.
If the Senate convicts Trump, it could decide to hold a subsequent vote to disqualify him from future office, and that vote only requires a simple majority to pass. For now, a few Republican senators breaking with Trump have said they will consider the article of impeachment. But at least 17 Republicans would have to join Democrats to meet the necessary 2/3 threshold to convict, making conviction a long shot.
Claris's report there, detailing how things might progress. Let's bring in our guests, because I know they're all itching to have their say on this issue, which, of course, is historic and is still, well, it's set to make news for, well, the next week and probably well beyond. I need to say now, before I bring you in, Amy Beeler, that we asked, you're from Democrats Abroad, we asked the Republicans overseas to take part. They couldn't provide a spokesperson today. So I just thought I'd get that out the way so people know why there isn't a Republican around the table. There we go. Amy, your thoughts?
Well, not only am I with Democrats abroad, but I've also taught American constitutional law and the American government process for years.
We're getting a double whammy from you.
Yeah. And I have to say that we are, in the United States, a nation of laws. And Nancy Pelosi, just now the Speaker of the House, in your clip, proved a point that I taught for years, which is that no one is above the law. By impeaching the president, even if he has 6 days left in office, the House of Representatives is bringing him up on charges. They're saying, you know what, nobody is above the law. They're not saying he's guilty of it. They're saying he is up on charges, and the Senate will then have the trial, whether they have the trial right away or whether they have it weeks from now. In fact, if they have it weeks from now, there's going to be more time to gather evidence, and then the possibility of him not only being convicted, but then them having a vote afterwards to remove him from the possibility of having office again is even higher. So I think that it's the correct move. It shows that we're a nation of laws, and the reason why the language is such in that impeachment article is because it shows breaking of specific federal law. So that's my initial thought.
Indeed, and the images we saw last week are, of course, shocking to see what happened at the Capitol, and for that to result in the deaths of 5 people, including a police officer, loss of life. It's an appalling state of affairs. Donald Trump hasn't admitted defeat in the election. He hasn't basically said that he was responsible for that, and his initial reaction was to say that his remarks in his speech, which preceded the march on the Capitol by his mob of supporters, he said his remarks were appropriate. What do you feel as an American, having seen that, having seen what's happened, and now Trump is impeached for the second time?
Well, of course, I don't like it, and I've had great pain thinking about where the country is, and the mental capacity of people at this point to attack the Capitol building. But I'd have to say that people were angry before the president spoke. And a segment of the American population is very angry about Black advancement. And by that, I mean that Black people exercised their right to vote in record numbers. And one of the consequences of the vote is that the national health care, which we had called Obamacare, but the national health program can survive. And it's been since 1865 that the proposal of giving health coverage and health programs to Black people, that's been on the table since 1865 when Dr. Rebecca Crumpler proposed it through the Freedmen's Bureau for the African Americans who were freed from enslavement. So people have been angry, not just in this term, but for over 100 years, over 150 years. And part of the anger is to keep Black people living below the level of white people. And so it hurts me to have to admit in 2021 that in my country there is such a hatred and such a feeling of superiority as to want to keep a group of people down. So before the president spoke, the country was headed toward a type of collision where Black advancement toward full citizenship was causing too much of a problem for too many people.
This is distressing to hear, that such things create in certain people that kind of anger you're talking about that results in what we saw last week. It is absolutely shocking to hear that, and you've so eloquently put it together. Nina, bear with me for the moment. I'm going to bring in Todd Belt, Professor and Director of the Political Management Program at George Washington University, to get his thoughts. Todd, we've heard from our two guests here in the studio, Amy Bilo and Nita Wiggins, about their first thoughts on this. From you, studying what you do, teaching what you do, and seeing this situation for the United States and for its political system, I imagine it leaves you feeling sad, perhaps angry.
Well, it certainly does. I mean, I study political science because I love democracy, and the primary institution of democracy is the vote. And what we see here is people really undercutting the validity of a vote. And there's been no evidence whatsoever that there was any rigging of this election. And the problem, I think, is future elections will be marred by this sort of people not trusting the vote. And that is absolutely crucial to a functioning democracy. You have to have the perceived legitimacy of the selection to have, popular sovereignty. And so that is something that I think is very concerning. And I would add on to what Amy and Lisa were saying earlier, and part of the belief in these conspiracies about the vote are tied up. There's some really good political science research that has recently come out that shows that a sense of victimization and seeing other groups in society advance is met with a reaction of the feeling that they don't deserve what they have, and therefore it is okay to act outside the law because the system as it is not helping you, but it is helping others. And that actually makes people more susceptible to misinformation and disinformation on the internet.
Indeed, the role that the internet has played is massive, and obviously, Donald Trump has used certain social networks as a way to basically trumpet exactly what he thought about certain people, certain things, certain issues, and it's gone far and wide. We'll get more on that from you, Todd, later. Thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in for a first remark Alex Meyer, specialist in US politics, professor at the University of Bourgogne, joining us from Dijon there in central France. Alex, thanks for joining us. You've heard our first three guests, Alex Meyer, Anita Wiggins, Amy Bilo, talking about what they feel, and clearly they're Americans. You're a Frenchman. You've study this from a distance. You're looking at it with a different respect, I suppose. Maybe a little step back. What are your thoughts? Did you see this coming? Did you see this happening when Trump was elected?
Well, I wouldn't brag that I saw it coming in any way, because that would be an overstatement. But I think as actually someone who studied and worked on the Republicans and the conservative movement, it seems to me that we can see the Trump phenomenon as just the latest symptom of a more latent crisis in the legitimacy of democracy as far as the Republican Party is concerned and the conservative movement at large. And so, as far as I'm concerned, when I saw the events last week, what I was really thinking of was what will happen next. And what will happen next will be based on what is the calculus of the Republican senators and members of the House that remain, and how they position themselves towards the future, with or without Trump, depending on disqualification. But even if Trump is out of the picture, his base is still sticking around, and the populist message that he crafted, even though he did not govern as a populist in any way, is sure to remain in place. And so I'm actually concerned about the future, in that it really hinges on the response from the Republican Party. And what we've seen in the Republican Party since at least the 1990s and the Gingrich years is not really encouraging in terms of the preservation of democracy. In a two-party system, if one of the party gives up on democracy, that's really threatening.
Indeed. Alex, can I just sort of ask you again about the issues there? You mentioned that it's a question of what happens next, what the Republicans do next. We heard from, for instance, the third most senior Republican, Liz Cheney, saying that she was going to vote to impeach Trump. And obviously that set a precedent which led to 9 others, as well as 10 in total, turning against Donald Trump. And obviously that was key in the impeachment vote. And of course, a year ago, no Republicans voted against him at all.
Still a small minority, though.
Agreed. One wonders sort of how many more need to kind of like see the light and realize that things need to change.
Well, because it's not about seeing the light. It's not about morality. It's just about political calculation. Do they think that their voters will go with them in punishing Trump, or do the voters want to follow Trump? Because politicians are not saints. They want to win elections. And if the voters are behind Trump, they will stay behind Trump. I mean, you've seen the polls about support in the Republican Party even after the riots. So, I mean, it's just going to hinge on the response from the Republican base, and based on this, the Republican senators. And if 17 senators vote to disqualify Trump, that will be a good indication. I'm not holding my breath.
Okay, thank you for your honesty, and thank you for that clarity to Alex Meyer at the University of Bourgogne, specialist, as we're hearing, in US politics. Stay with us, sir. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Todd Belt joining us too, from the other side of our studio. Two guests here as well. Taking a short break now. We'll be joining you again after that. Welcome back to the France 24 debate. Our panel to discuss the second impeachment of Donald J. Trump. From Democrats Abroad, Amy Bilo. Thanks for being with us,
Sure.
Amy. From the ESJ here in Paris, former news journalist and lecturer and author of the book Civil Rights Baby, Nita Wiggins. Great to see you. Thank you very much
Good to
indeed.
see you.
Two guests joining us from afar. First, Todd Belt, who is a professor and director of political management at George Washington University, and Alex Meyer, specialist in US politics at the University of Bourgogne. And in the center of the screen there, the person we're going to first, Kedevan Gorgistani, our correspondent. Kedevan, thank you for joining us. Tell us about the atmosphere where you are. Of course, it's only last week that there was the storming of the Capitol. We've had the second impeachment of Donald Trump. You're there covering it all. What's the feeling?
Well, the feeling is that Washington is now looking ahead to that inauguration, but it feels really like Fortress Washington, D.C., because you have barriers and roadblocks really all over downtown, all over that area which encircles the White House, the Washington Monument, the Mall, and the Capitol. And those roadblocks and those barriers are way bigger, way larger than they usually are. You have these new barriers now, those 7-foot barriers that are supposedly unscalable, and those barriers protected by the National Guard. We're hearing now that instead of 15,000, there are going to be up to 20,000 National Guard members in Washington, D.C. in the lead up to that inauguration. That's according to the counts by several U.S. media outlets, more than there will be after January 15th in Iraq and Afghanistan combined. So more troops in Washington, D.C. than in Iraq and Afghanistan combined after this weekend. And it really gives you a sense of how much heightened security there is in the city, as everyone is on edge. Lawmakers, law enforcement, everyone is really waiting to see what happens. And the latest information we have is that the National Mall will be closed off to anyone except security officers and the media. No visitors, absolutely. And the D.C. police chief has said, do not come to Washington, D.C. And if you live in Washington, D.C., do not come to the downtown area. Stay away from that area. You are not welcome. Unfortunately, we won't see those thousands of people on the National Mall watching the inauguration.
Kedevan Gorgistani, thank you very much indeed for giving us that sense of how things are right now in Washington. Kedevan, of course, covering all aspects of this story for us here on France 24. Let's get back to our guests in the studio. Amy Bilo from Democrats Abroad. And I'll say again, as I said at the start of the programme, we wanted someone from Republicans overseas. They couldn't give us a guest this evening. So we extended the offer. They couldn't fulfill it. They couldn't come along. But you're here from the Democrats.
Yes.
So they can't accuse us of imbalance. We've actually tried.
That's right.
We heard from Alex Meyer from the University of Bourgogne talking about how Machiavellian this all is now. What happens next? From your perspective, obviously from the Democrat perspective, how important is it to go ahead and basically have this Senate trial of Trump and go ahead and, I presume, rule against him?
Well, the ruling will come after the evidence is given. So even though I am a Democrat, I believe in the rule of law, and that's the way that it works in the Senate. So I believe that the House managers are going to present an incredible case. I believe that, as I said before, with time, they're going to have even more evidence to show once the Senate trial does begin, whenever that is. And I do feel it's important to bring the charges, which they did, and have the trial, which they will. Even if it's after Trump has left office, because we don't allow individuals in the United States, whatever their position, to break the law and say, well, you know, they'll be finished breaking the law soon, so let's just step back. The analogy that I came up with earlier, and it's a terrible analogy, but it's true. If a woman is being beaten by her drunk husband, we don't tell her to just wait wait it out, he'll pass out in a few hours. No, we go in, we arrest him, and then we sort it out later and figure out, has he been doing this or not? We don't just tell her to wait. Right now, or up until the impeachment decision by the House of Representatives, we were simply waiting, sitting around, waiting to find out what was happening. It's no good. People say, oh, it's only 9 days, it's only 8 days. Look what he could do in a few hours. So it's incredibly important that we do that, not just as a way to move forward, which I believe we will. And I do want to make one point, if I can,
ahead, please,
to what the
please.
professor said. The individuals, the Republicans who voted for impeachment yesterday, the 10 Republicans, to some extent, they had their own power base. They didn't rely on Trump's power base, and they weren't relying necessarily on his base of voters. There were a couple of people who really stuck their neck out, and we're going to see what happens. But for the majority of the ones who did, they had their own base, and I think that that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Is that going to carry over into the Senate? Are more senators going to be persuaded by the evidence and also realize that they themselves are not in danger if their job is their only thing they're worried about? I would want them to worry about the country as well, but okay. And so this will move forward and more individuals will come out. And we have to also remember, 4 Republicans didn't vote at all yesterday, 4 Republicans who were there.
How could
they
that
didn't
happen?
vote yes or no. It's my first inclination is fear. As was reported by many reputable sources, many individuals were afraid to go on record as saying yes. And perhaps they would have said no, but they didn't say anything.
Indeed, and the US, of course, considered to be one of the bastions of democracy. For that to happen here, I find it shocking completely that a lawmaker, senator, House member, whatever, is scared to express their opinion in the Congress. It's absolutely crazy.
It is.
On the streets, though, of course, many people who are angry for their own reasons, they stormed the Capitol. Trump got like 70-odd million votes in the election. There are clearly many people who actually say, yeah, he's my man.
74 million, I think, is the latest number. But as we talk about the United States as a country of laws, what I often share with students here in Paris is that there's a mentality from some people in the United States, and it is a burn it down mentality. If I can't control it, burn it down. And so when I hear about the plans for the inauguration next week, it makes me remember that as a child, I watched the inauguration ceremony of Jimmy Carter from Georgia, and I'm from Georgia. And it was a wonderful thing as a teenager to see the president and the First Lady Rosalind Carter leave the automobile, and they walked to the Capitol. And it was just lovely watching from a child's perspective. And then I attended the inauguration of Barack Obama in 2009. I was out on the Mall with 2 million people, and what I was told is that there were 0 arrests. And from what I observed, it was just fantastic. And the 2 or 3 days before that inauguration, there was the free concert, and Bon Jovi was there, Mary J. Blige. So it was a celebration of things that the voters like and that the voters appreciated.
How times have changed.
And so here we are after 2 terms of Barack Obama and 1 term of President Donald Trump. There are some people, as we see, who can't handle the fact that the black president was in office for 2 terms. The white president did not win enough voters for the second time. So I return to the burn it down mentality. I'm not in charge, so I take it away from everybody else. And that is how I see where we are right now, January 2021.
Nita Wiggins, thank you. Nita Wiggins in the studio. Amy Below here too from Democrats Abroad. Let's bring in Todd Belt from the George Washington University, professor and director of the political management program there. Todd, we heard from Nita about this idea of a president who wants to burn it down because he can't have it. It almost seems like an incredibly childish perspective that we're getting from the Trump camp. Would you think that is accurate? Would you think that his supporters share that point of view?
I certainly do. I mean, they were out there in the streets last week doing that, exactly that. So, I mean, there's really no other way you can see it. If we don't get our way, then nobody does. And we see a number of representatives say that I need to be the voice for 74 million people who were voiceless. Well, that's how democracy works. If you lose, you don't get a voice. That we have what's called the first past the post system here in the United States. If you get one more vote than the other person, you lose. I mean, you win. And of course, the electoral college system, if you get one more elector than the other, then you win. That's just how it works. You don't necessarily get a voice. You have to run a campaign that's going to appeal to enough people to win. So I think that is concerning. And as Alex was talking about with the senators and the members of the House, the ones that had come over, I don't think these are necessarily tremendous profiles in courage. Some of them are rather new and were supportive of Trump. But if we look at the Republicans, we have another election coming up. Speaking of elections, coming up in 2022, there's going to be 34 senators up for re-election. Most of them will be Republicans, about 20 of them, and they're in pretty safe Republican seats. Most of those Republican senators. What do they have to fear? Not necessarily a Democrat taking their seat away, but they have to fear somebody who might be Trumpist running a primary campaign against them to take their seat away. So I think we might see some fragmentation in the Republican Party. I don't think the burn it down movement is going to continue. I think the deplatforming of them on the internet has been tremendously helpful. It reduces their ability to organize. I'm not saying there won't be any violence or any problems on Inauguration Day, but I think long term, people are going to have to figure out whether or not this animal that Trump created, his followers, if they really want to hitch their wagon to them. We saw, Ted Cruz wanted to, and Josh Hawley wanted to, but there might be others who might be rethinking that as they move forward, whether or not that becomes a real force within the Republican Party. And a lot of it's going to depend on whether or not Donald Trump gets his television network or has his own show or starts to play kingmaker within the party.
Indeed. You too see Donald Trump as a weekly or even nightly chat show host on a certain network. I think that's kind of predictable that's going to happen, along with the machine behind him producing it and churning out what they want to churn out. Let's bring in Alex Meyer from the University of Bourgogne, specialist in US politics. Alex, you were talking earlier about you don't want to hold your breath in terms of what's going to happen next with this impeachment. How important do you think it was that, or how important do you think it is, Donald Trump's been barred from social media? He, of course, is lamenting the repression of his freedom of speech.
Well, I think it's important because he's really giving voice to a group of extremist people within the Republican Party and the conservative movement who have been there, I would argue, all along. I mean, in the 1950s, we had the John Birch Society, but at least the leaders of the Republican Party had sense enough to distance themselves eventually from the extremists. Now, the difference today is that the President of the United States was actually encouraging them instead of fighting against their influence. And so, as we said, what happens next will depend on what is the reaction of Republican members of the House and the Senate and future candidates in office and how they see their relationship to these people. And I think I would slightly disagree on a small thing that was evoked earlier, which is that this is the creature of Trump, that he created this movement. But I mean, I'm sorry, but the Tea Party movement that emerged weeks after that great inauguration and that kumbaya on the Mall was about taking the country back. It was just the same people. And I'm afraid that they're not going anywhere. And getting rid of Trump, as I said already, is not going to be the end of the problem. And to be honest, I don't have the solution to the problem. If I did, I would give it to anybody. But really, it's much worse than I think we let on if we just think that getting rid of Trump helps solve the problem.
Indeed. One person says she has a solution. Nita.
Well, when we think of future elections, why don't we insist that the Commission on Presidential Debates, that organization requires 10, 15 years, 20 years of tax forms, filed tax forms to get on the debate stage?
That would have immediately disqualified Donald Trump, obviously.
And I'm not targeting any person. I am looking for a solution that costs zero. It's a matter of willpower. It's a matter of reinforcing institutions. If we want to protect the vote, if we want people to have the opportunity to vote for the person who could serve what they're looking for as citizens, why not demand from tomorrow that the Commission on Presidential Debates put a requirement on tax documents to get on the debate stage? We saw that the CPD changed its rules to allow Michael Bloomberg on the debate stage, having disqualified Cory Booker. Having disqualified Cory Booker. Okay, so why not make that happen? It costs $0.
$0. But of course, some embarrassment to Donald Trump. You weren't picking on Trump, but I think there's the obvious implication that it's looking at Trump's refusal to actually sort of open his tax books to scrutiny by anybody.
It's admission to the debate stage. And tax documents take the stage.
And it speaks to the financial regularity, the personal rectitude, the integrity of the candidate. It sounds like a very good idea, frankly, I think. There's an issue about denial within certain members of the party to the Republican Party. I'm just looking at a quote here from Jim Jordan, the Republican from Ohio. They impeached the president of the U.S. for telling people to peacefully make their voices heard. Now, I heard the speech he delivered. He didn't actually say that, Donald Trump. But Jim Jordan is trying to sort of push that in the House before the vote, saying that. Jody Arrington, another Republican from Texas, the president didn't incite a riot, the president didn't lead an insurrection, and there are no high crimes or misdemeanors requisite of an impeachment. When you have that attitude, that must make you, Amy, I don't know, despair.
Oh, I don't despair at all. I think Jim Jordan is a bit of a clown, personally. And I think that numerous individuals in his party are...
A clown that gets voted for. A clown that has a vote. A clown who's in the House.
The House of Representatives is the lower house, if I may say, and I'm not sticking my nose down at anything. Please don't think I am. But there's smaller groups of individuals, local groups of individuals who feel that a particular person with a particular perspective sounds the horn for them. And that's what he does. And that's fine. He can do that.
He's playing to his voters.
He's playing to his voters. If you go back through the timeline, all the way back to the first, and I'm not going to go as far back as 1865 because I don't have expertise in what you're discussing, but if you go back to the birther lie that Donald Trump told about Barack Obama. If you go all the way back there, he was fomenting this anger. He was trying to capture the Tea Party individuals and the individuals for whom this was not acceptable, that an individual of color had reached the highest office in the land. And he then on December 19th said, big protest in D.C. on January 6th, be there, will be wild. That was his first one. So his words on the 6th are insightful, and we can go to those as well. But in terms of leading up to the 6th as well, there were problems. I will be there. It's going to be a historic day. We will win. Do it, Mike. He was pushing Mike Pence with his tweets. We will never give up, he said. We will never concede during that speech. So the speech leading up was one thing, but there were also time and time again prior to that, years before, months before, days before, and the day of
And of course, Trump turning on Pence, calling him a traitor, and then some members of the mob that went to the Capitol apparently carrying a noose looking for Pence.
Yes, hang Mike Pence was the chant outside of the Capitol building. And when they got in, that's who they were looking for. It is beyond shocking.
Absolutely shocking situation.
Yeah.
Todd Belt, we haven't got much time, Todd, but I'm going to you for a quick comment to round this off. How important is it to see this procedure through and to get, the result that is judged to be the correct one?
Well, I think it's really important because you have to have penalties for criminal behavior, especially when the popular sovereignty, when people's rule over themselves is at stake. The very nature of our democracy, people's faith in that is at stake. And we have somebody, Donald Trump, did he create this with his followers? Does it go back to the Tea Party? Might even go back to the militias of the early 90s? No, but he really weaponized it and he made it very personal. What he has is a cult of personality. and take some of the air out of that balloon by following a legal process that holds him to account so he can't just kill somebody on Fifth Avenue, as he said, I think is really important, not just from a legal standpoint, but also to reassert a level of faith in our democracy.
Indeed, he did say that he was that popular he could get away with that kind of crime. And let's hope that that is never, ever, ever put to the test. Todd Belt, thank you for joining us very much indeed. Todd Belt from the George Washington University. Alex Meyer, I'm sorry I couldn't get back to you, sir, from the University of Bourgogne. Thank you for your insight. Thanks to our guests here in the studio, Nita Wiggins from the ESJ, former news journalist and author of the book Civil Rights Baby. And thanks to Amy Below from Democrats Abroad. Great to see you. Thanks to you all for joining us. Thanks to you for watching too. Stay with us. More to come here on France 24.